Hello and welcome to the Beaverton School District Budget Committee meeting for May 9th. We have some important work to do here tonight. We're going to be electing a chair and vice chair of our budget committee and then going into the budget presentation where we're going to learn more about the budget. And for anybody who is watching this live streaming from home, we have a budget document up on our website that you can find under the annual budget page that includes all of the details. But tonight we're going to get a presentation on that document and understand more of the rationale. And then at the end, there'll be time for budget committee and school board members to ask questions about that budget proposal. So I'm going to start off with a roll call for our budget committee and for our school board members. I'm going to call your first name along with whether you're a board member and what zone you are. So zone 1, Susan, and please answer with here or present.
Here.
All right. And our zone 1 budget committee member, Jason.
Here.
Zone 2 school board member, Karen.
Presente.
And zone 2 community member or budget committee member, Farah.
Here.
Zone 3 board member, Eric.
Here.
And zone 3 budget committee member, Diane.
Here.
Zone 4 board member, Sunita.
Here.
And zone 4 budget committee member, Alok.
Here.
Zone 5 school board member, Ugana.
I'm here.
And zone 5 budget committee member, Krista.
Here.
Zone 6 school board member, Becky.
Here.
And zone 6 budget committee member, Heidi.
Here.
And zone 7 school board member, Tom, I'm here. And zone 7 budget committee member, Lisa.
I'm here.
You there? Great. Okay, it sounds like everybody is here. We will move on to our second agenda item, which is electing a budget committee chair. Do I hear any nominations for chair of the Beaverton School District Budget Committee? Becky, I see your hand up.
Yes, I would like to nominate Heidi Edwards. Heidi has served with me as my budget representative for the last 7 years. She's had experience in leadership on the budget committee as serving as vice chair. And also she currently serves in the position as chair of the Twalton Hills Park and Recreation District. So I think she's more than qualified to serve as the chair of our budget committee.
Do I hear a second? Susan?
Second.
Oh, someone else seconded.
Oh, who beat you to the punch?
Lisa seconded it.
Lisa. Okay. All right. So it's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion on the item before we take a vote? Okay. Hearing no discussion, we'll go to a vote. Okay. Zone 1 school board member, Susan, how say you on this?
I'll say aye. I say aye.
Aye. All right. Zone 1 budget committee member, Jason.
Aye.
Zone 2 board member, Karen.
Aye.
Zone 2 budget committee member, Farah.
Aye.
Zone 3 school board member, Eric.
Aye.
And zone 3 budget committee member, Diane.
Aye.
Zone 4 school board member, Sunita.
Aye.
And zone 4 budget committee member, Alok.
Aye.
Zone 5 school board member, Ugana.
Aye.
And zone 5 budget committee member, Krista.
Aye.
Zone 6 school board member, Becky.
An enthusiastic aye.
And zone 6 budget committee member, Heidi.
Aye.
And zone 7 board member, Tom, another enthusiastic aye. And zone 7 budget committee member, Lisa.
Aye.
Right. It passes unanimously. And Heidi, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Next on, and thank you. What an honor and compliment. It's a pleasure to serve with all of you. And for all of you who are volunteering for this really important work on the school district budget committee as well. So our third agenda item is the election of a budget committee vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? I see, Susan, I see your hand.
I would like to nominate Jason Hombaum as vice chair for the 22-23 budget committee. He currently is an educator as a school principal in the Sheridan School District and has had multiple years in Sheridan, but before that he was a teacher in the Beaverton School District. He lives in the Beaverton School District, and I think he is currently on the budget committee for the Sheridan School Districts. So he is going to be Mr. Budget himself. So I am honored to nominate Jason.
Thank you, Susan. Do we have a second for Jason as our budget vice chair?
Second.
Thank you, Becky. Any discussion? And we will go through with a roll call vote just as we did before. So aye or nay. And Susan, zone 1, Susan.
Aye.
Zone 1, Jason.
Aye.
Zone 2, Karen.
Aye.
Zone 2, Farad.
Aye.
Zone 3, Eric.
Aye.
Zone 3, Diane.
Aye.
Zone 4, Sunita.
Aye.
Zone 4, Alok.
Aye.
Zone 5, Ulana.
Aye.
Zone 5, Krista.
Aye.
Zone 6, Becky.
Aye.
Myself, Heidi, zone 6, yes, aye. And zone 7, Tom.
Aye.
And zone 8, or zone 7, Lisa.
Aye.
We're not going to come up with new zones during a budget committee meeting. Sorry about that. Well, wonderful. And congratulations, Jason, on being elected as our budget vice chair for this fiscal year. Next up is our budget message from Superintendent Grotting. So we'll move into that. Hello, Don.
Hello, Heidi. Thank you, Chair Edwards, Vice Chair Hombaum, members of the Budget Committee. Want to welcome everyone to our first Budget Committee to present the proposed 2022-23 budget. I want to especially thank and welcome our Budget Committee members, especially our new members that are on the Budget Committee. And as Heidi said, thank you for your service. Know everybody's busy, and for you to take the time to help support our students is truly appreciated. Also want to thank our school board members for being here, who also make up the Budget Committee. Also really want to reach out and thank any of our students, staff, families, and other community members who are with us tonight, joining us this evening. Tonight, I will not read my entire budget message. I think all of you have the entire budget in front of you. And the budget message is located on pages 4 to 7 of your budget handbook. But I am going to speak to some of the major highlights. And then following my message tonight, our business department will provide detailed information regarding our budget that will hopefully answer most of your questions, or at least many of your questions. To start out with, and needless to say, the 2021-22 school year has been extremely challenging due to the pandemic. Our goal for the remainder of this school year and looking forward to the next school year in our budget is to remain in full in-person 5 days a week for all children, and to also provide the opportunity for our parents and students choosing maybe to enter into an online or remote learning program to have that flexibility for all of our students. Our 2022-23 budget is based on a state school fund appropriation of $9.3 billion for the 2021-2023 biennium. It is also important to note that this budget contains significant one-time funds from federal and state sources that includes $48 million of federal dollars that must be spent in the next 2 years, and an $8 million state fund for summer programs. And I believe that funding must be spent by, I believe it's in late October. And that is for summer funding to support our students. Our budget also includes $32.1 million allocation from the Student Success Act, where dollars are derived from the state corporate activities tax. And this is an ongoing tax, and hopefully will bring long-term sustainable funding to not only the Beaverton School District, but school districts throughout Oregon. As in any budget, there are several assumptions that are included in any school budget. And this year, it's no different. In fact, I would say in this year, it's probably a few more assumptions that often we don't have to assume that there are some solid numbers to go by. And I'm going to cover some of those. And I'd like to draw your attention to page 5 of the budget message and talk about some of these assumptions that our business department are making some projections. And I'm not going to go through and read all of these to you either, but I'm going to highlight some of these that will have some impact on next year's budget. And the first one I want to talk to is this budget includes a cost of living increase of 3% across the board for all employees. So we're currently in a bargaining process with our certified and our classified folks. And so that process is not completed. And right now, within this budget, you'll see a 3% cost of living increase. Also, I think it's important to note that in this budget, we have about 286.2 teachers that are paid through our local option levy of $38.2 million. So a big shout out to our community for providing this in our times. And just to let folks know that the option levy will need to be voted on next year, as it will end in June of 2023. The next one is probably one of the most critical issues that Beaverton School District is facing, as well as many other districts throughout the state, and that's a decline in enrollment. And we can attribute that decline to somewhat to the pandemic, specific to Beaverton. I think we are seeing many of our families getting priced out of their housing, and folks not able to afford. But just to let you know, most of that decline is taking place in our elementary grades and our middle school grades. And before the pandemic, just to let you know, we're probably down somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2,000 students. So if you just figure we get paid approximately $9,000 and some change for all of our students. But districts, to include Beaverton, are really looking at that decline in enrollment and how that's going to impact us in the future. Throughout Oregon, we have lost about 32,000 students. And when you add the weighting, so we get some extra dollars if you're a student, or if we have students of special education, English language learners, homeless, titled students, students in poverty. And when you add those weightings, it's about 38,000 students. So enrollment is a critical part of the budget and something to look forward to in the future, to making sure what we're doing in this budget is going to be sustainable. We're also, I think it's very important to note that we're making an investment in class size reduction of $7 million for K-12, and additional $1 million targeted specifically at the middle school. We're also reducing athletic participation fees by 1/2. We're finding that a lot of our students are choosing not to participate because of fees. And for some of our students who are designated at the poverty level, even that 1/2 can be offset by different types of funds. But for all students, regardless of economic income, we're reducing those fees by 1/2. Here's one that I think is really important to notice. Increase of 105.2 positions compared to the 2021-22 budget, and 147.7 more positions compared to the 2021-22 actual hired positions. And so when you see that, you might ask, well, what's the difference in those numbers? The difference is, because of the pandemic, we're often not able to hire and fill all positions. And then an increase of direct student supports of $9.5 million, including the class size investment noted above. In this budget, also, I think you'll learn about how the district is using an equity lens to allocate funds and to address poverty, unfinished learning, social and emotional supports, and disparities existing in our most vulnerable and marginalized students. I'm going to expand just a little bit on our staffing allocation model. It's called SAM for short. And the district started looking at schools across the district and their poverty. And we felt that our schools of poverty should be supported more than maybe our more affluent schools. However, we also thought that even in our affluent schools, we have students of poverty. So we created a mechanism, a metric that provides extra funding for all students of poverty, and that's allocated to our schools. And finally, I want to just take some time and just thank our budget team, our business department led by Associate Superintendent Mike Schofield, and our budget director Jessica Jones for putting this together. They've been working, I will say, day and night, but they have really been trying to put a lot of effort into this. And we always try to wait up to the last minute because we want to give you as many knowns as we know. There was hope at some point, hopefully maybe we're going to get some bargains settled, which really we could give you some solid numbers. But there's a lot of assumption in this budget, but I think it's put together with the best projections that we currently have right now. But there are some assumptions that are going out there. There's also some very unknowns about what's going to happen all the way from with COVID. We see our COVID numbers rising right now, and being able to plan on and having some supports for those type of events when they come up. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Edwards, and I believe you're going to get some more detailed information about the budget from our business department.
Thank you, Superintendent Grading. Moving into our next agenda item, we have Mike Schofield and Jessica Jones. We'll be sharing more details about the budget. So I think, Mike, you're up first here.
Thank you, Chair Edwards. I appreciate it and appreciate everyone's time this evening. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through a presentation here tonight. The goal of this presentation is to kind of synthesize and summarize the 282-page document you have that we delivered to you last week into a kind of a 20,000-foot view. So with that, I will share my screen and we will get started. Can folks see it? Okay, so let's start with roles and responsibilities, talk a little bit about what we do as an administration and what the budget committee, the role of the budget committee is as we walk through this process. So the charge of the administration is we present to you a proposed budget proposed by the superintendent. It's our best effort at what we think the resources are that are necessary to meet the needs of students for next year within the dollars that we have. And after tonight and after the budget message Don just presented, we serve as an advisor in an advisory capacity to you in the budget committee. On the budget committee, you do some technical things. You approve appropriations, tax rates and amounts. You approve at a very big, high level in terms of you approve it by fund and function. Even though our chart of accounts goes all the way out to fund, function, object, center, area and sub area, you don't go to that detailed level in your approval. You're funding or you're approving just the fund and the functional level. And we'll get into that a little bit as we move forward. The budget committee is subject to public meeting laws, simple majority, and you can inquire about programs, but the budget committee as a whole does not make program decisions. That's left for the board. Your options for approval, you've got three. You can approve the budget as proposed. You can increase the appropriation because you think we're going to get some more money, or you can decrease the appropriation because you think we'll get less or that we're spending too much. So those are the roles and responsibilities on the presentation agenda tonight. We're going to cover the components of the budget. We're going to cover the general fund. We're going to cover some significant budget modifications. Don mentioned those, class size and the like. We're going to go over grant funds because they are such a big player that haven't been so much in the past, but we'll get into that and show you that grants are playing a significant role in our funding and making it a little more difficult for us to show you how these funds braid together. But we'll do that tonight. We'll talk about the numbers for those of you that like the accountants like me like to dig into the numbers and look at what they're telling us. We'll jump into those and take a look. We'll also talk about what's been going on with our reserves this year. We got good questions from budget committee members about, how's our budget compared to actual, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the reserve discussion. Then we'll walk you through the budget document, just some select areas we think would be of most interest to you that you might want to check out. We'll do next steps. Then we'll come back to the full screen and do questions and comments that you may have. Then we have one public comment that was written in. We'll go over that. And then I think we have two folks that want to make public comment tonight in the live format. So we'll let them do that. And then finally, Superintendent will have his closing remarks, and we'll turn it back over to Chair Edwards to close out the meeting. Okay, so components of the budget, the way we're organized by fund. We have the general fund, which is for our core operations of the district, special revenue funds, things like grants, nutrition services, the SIA school investment account, ESSER, those are the federal funds, the one-time federal funds Don mentioned, et cetera. We've got our debt service fund. That's where we have our general obligation bonds, pension bonds, and any other debt we've issued as a district. Capital projects fund, you'll see that we budgeted for that this year. We are out asking for support for a capital levy with our community right now. We'll know in another week or so, but that's where you'll see we budgeted for facility construction, acquisition, and equipment. 500 funds are enterprise funds. We don't have those. 600 internal reserve funds. We have a couple of those, one for our insurance reserve and one for workers' compensation. And fiduciary funds, we don't have those in our district. In terms of components of the budget, you see, as we just mentioned, you see the general fund at $622 million, about 41% of the total budget you'll be looking at tonight. Capital projects, a big number, 37.4% of the budget. Grant fund, again, that $156 million, that's a significant amount. If you've been away from the budget process for a couple of years or are unfamiliar with it, that's increased significantly in the last couple of years. And then you see the rest of the funds listed there as well. Key takeaway here, though, is general fund, grant fund, capital projects. Those are the three big ones. On the general fund side, what you see in the proposed budget for revenue, $458 million, or about 89% of our budget comes from the state school fund. So when you see us paying attention to what's going on in the legislature and what dollars they're considering appropriating to the state school fund, that's important to us because that's where about 89% of our revenue comes from. Local option levy, we are fortunate to have community support for a local option levy that funds about 285 teachers in the district. As Don mentioned, we'll be out asking for continued support for that levy sometime next year. But again, a significant resource to us as a district, and helps us with keeping class sizes at a reasonable level. And then the all other sources, those are primarily a chunk of money we get passed through from our Northwest Regional ESD, and then some athletic activity fees and just other miscellaneous investment income and the like makes up the rest of our funding sources. On expenditures, when you think about how do you put together a $1.8 billion budget, all funds included, how does that work and where do you start? Well, we start with our bargained amounts, right? So we start on the expenditure side and we look at what we've bargained and what we've agreed to with our bargaining units, whether it's granting steps along columns in the salary schedule, cost of living, professional development, working conditions, those costs as well. Think about prep time. If you have more prep time, then you've got more adults with kids while we have prep time within the school day. Benefits, health benefits, and other included, then leaves, right? So in our environment, when folks are out on sick leave or other types of leave, especially classroom teachers and the like, we hire substitutes to fill those positions. So we budget for substitutes there as well. On the superintendent's cabinet, it's a very defined and justify everything process. So as the cabinet submits their budget requests each year, those are reviewed by the deputy superintendents individually and then brought to the superintendent for with recommendations for approval. At the school level, Don mentioned it, we have the staffing allocation methodology. It's an allocation based on the number of students and the demographics of those students. The discretionary dollars, same thing. It's allocated based on number of students and the demographics of those students, specifically poverty, special ed, and the like. We use the staffing allocation methodology and the student investment account, but those both support staffing in our schools, as well as one-time ESSER funds, and you'll see some of that as we go through the presentation tonight. So that's kind of how we begin to build our budget from year to year. Oops. Expenditures, you can see we are salary and benefits are about 90% of what we spend. So when you look at our general fund budget, we are a very people-intensive business, and delivering education is a people-intensive process. So that's where about 90% of our dollars go. You see we pay our utility bills, we make some payments to our charters by contract. We transfer out to those insurance reserves funds, as I mentioned earlier, and we contract for some instructional services that we don't provide. Taken as a whole, you look at everything else, we have about 5.9% left. So when you look at the 90% on salary and benefits, and then those other payments that we make, it leaves us with about 5.9%. That's kind of what you would call in that discretionary area. Okay, significant investments. Again, Superintendent Grotting mentioned this class size through the staffing allocation methodology. We added 7 million in K-12 classroom teachers. And then we added another additional 1 million targeted specifically at middle school classroom teachers through the staffing allocation methodology. We also have direct supports to students of 1.5 million. Think about things like pre-K, MLD, newcomers, safety, transportation, payments made to charter schools. And then in addition to that, we have operations support of about 1.5 million. That's some staffing decisions that were made for additional operational support. You see it in HR, in equity in the business office, and it's about 10 FTE. Grant revenues, again, can't say enough. We've got ESSER 2 and 3, that's $48 million. That's 30% of the total grant revenues in the light green there. Those are funds that will be gone in 2 years. So we need to have those spent by September of 2024. And you'll see later in the presentation, we've got a way to do that. But that's a significant piece of our grant funds. In the lighter red color, you see the SIA at 32%. This is a fairly new source of funding. As Don mentioned, it's funded through corporate activities tax. This should be a stable source of funding as we move through the years, barring any economic troubles. And then the total on the side, you see federal, we've got 81.6 million, state at 71.2, and private and local at 3.9 million. So it's a general summary of our grant funds and where we get those dollars. Here's the student investment account a little more close up. 2020, 2021 was the first year of the SIA. Our original award was 32.3 million. The board had just approved that $32.3 million plan, and COVID hit. And you see that what we actually got in 2020, 2021 was about 10.5 million. So didn't get nearly the dollars out of the original year, again, due to the economic uncertainty and what was allocated to schools and the shutdown and slowdown in the spring of 2020. It bounced back in the current year to $30.8 million. And currently our projected award is 32.1 million. So we're almost back to the original award from a couple of years ago in our projection for next year. Goal 1 of the SI is increasing academic achievement, including reducing academic disparities for focal populations. Remember, we went out and surveyed a number of our underserved and underrepresented communities through the SIA process and got feedback. And the other goal 2, addressing students' health and safety needs. So those are the 2 primary goals of the SIA. And you'll see here in a little bit how we dealt with those dollars. ESSER summary, again, we've had ESSER 1, that's behind us. We spent those. ESSER 2 is part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act of 20.7 million. ESSER 3 is part of the American Rescue Plan that was passed later for 46.4 million. Again, one-time funds, we say it all the time because these dollars will go away, but they must be spent by September 30th, 2024. And we're currently projecting we'll have about $48 million remaining beginning July 1, 2022. And plan modifications will continue. You know, Don mentioned the virus and what's going on with COVID, and numbers are increasing. And, you know, you'll see that we've felt some dollars back in the ESSER funding just because of some of that uncertainty as we get through the summer and start the next school year. So we've got an updated plan, but modifications will continue with those ESSER funds. How did we consider those spending plans? Well, we used the community and staff priorities from January 21 for the 21-22 plans, and then we used the January and February 22 survey for adjustments for the upcoming years. We used the SIA, Student Investment Account, and SAM priorities that were provided. So we looked back on data and feedback we had already gathered from our community and implemented portions of that in the ESSER. We have some dollars in there for operations and HVAC. We applied the equity lens as we went through this process. And if you want to dig into the details, we've got it posted on our website under the accountability page for departments. And by the way, we'll get you a copy of this presentation at the end as well. Here's a breakdown of the ESSER strategies that we're required to use with those ESSER dollars. And I'll cover the 3 big ones. 28% of our funding is going towards the time and attention area strategy, 22.4 in relationships and mental health supports, and about 23% on improve indoor air quality and HVAC issues. And then you see the kind of laundry list as we go down there of the other areas that we need to cover in the budgeted strategies. Salaries versus non-salaries. The board's asked us to be careful here with how we allocate these dollars. The strategy here was to allocate more salaries than non-salary in the beginning. You'll see that 19.1 million in 21-22, 71% of that being spent on salary, 5.5 million on non-salary. That number begins to shift. Salary at 13.9 in the second year, non-salary at 40% in 22-23 budget. Up in the green area, you see pending allocations. I mentioned those before. Those are dollars that weren't spent in the current year that we'll address over the summer and into the fall to allocate where we need to. And then you see in 23-24, that salary drops down to 6.3 million in year 3, or about 44%, and non-salaries at 13%. So salaries will go down over time. And the reason we have scheduled those salaries to go down over time is to avoid a cliff at the end of that 3-year term where we've got a bunch of staff and we don't want to get in a layoff situation. So we're guiding these numbers down each year over the 3-year period. Summer learning grants, Don mentioned those. We got 2 grants totaling 7 million. Summer academic support grants for the high school level and summer enrichment program grants for the K-8 level. We need a 25% local match. We'll use our ESSER dollars for that. That's an approved way of doing it. Timeline is we were approved April 4th, and we've got to have the money spent by October 15th, 2022. Spending plans are still in development. We've got folks working on that pretty much every day right now, trying to line out schools, qualifications, how many students will be served, and what schools they'll be located in. But all that work is underway and in progress. Okay, numbers, where are we and kind of where have we been? This is one set of numbers that we look at graphically. Student enrollment by weight, you'll see that in the green bars, you'll see what our enrollment has been. You see our 18-19 and 19-20 actual. And then as Don mentioned, you see our enrollment drop in 2021. It's dropped a little bit more in 21-22. And we're scheduling it to drop even just a little bit more in 2022-2023. The kind of mustard color at the top is our ELL population. The green color special education population, pretty flat, maybe even a little down. The red line is our charter schools, again, pretty flat, maybe a modest increase over that time period. And then you see the blue line is our students in poverty. Along with our drop in the number of students, our poverty has also dropped. I think some of our poverty drop has to do with some of the relief that we've gotten at the federal level that brought some people up above the poverty line, but we'll stay tuned on that. But overall, what the data shows us is that we are less in poverty than we were a couple of years ago. Okay, here's the big number spreadsheet that those of you that have been on the board for a while or been on the budget committee for a while are familiar with. We break these numbers out between resources and expenditures. So on the resource side, we have our beginning fund balance. We have what we consider state-controlled resources, which is the state school fund and our local property taxes that are included in the state school fund. And then we have our locally controlled resources. Those are things like the local option levy, those ESD dollars and the like. And then a total of those numbers. And then finally, the total of the beginning fund balance plus state and local of 522 million. That was our actual in 2019, 2020. And then you can see what we spent. We spent just under 260 million on salaries, almost 167 million on benefits, and 39.4 million on everything else. Gives us a total, and it shows our ending fund balance was 56.4 million. So taking our resources, deducting our expenditures from that, gave us a fund balance of 56.4 million. We add to that at the bottom a financial reserve that the board last year designated primarily for PERS in the future, and you get a total reserves of just over 60 million. Looking across at our 2020, 2021 actuals, you'll see that number grew. You'll see that our revenues grew, primarily based through our state controlled dollars and through our beginning fund balance. Salaries, benefits, and all other, again, brings our ending fund balance to 85.6 million, had about 4 million in financial reserves, takes our total to 89.6 million at the end of 21, the fiscal year 2021. For fiscal year 2021-22, you can see here's our adopted budget versus what our current estimate is. So you see our beginning fund balance was better than what we budgeted for last year. Our state controlled dollars are up. We'll talk about that in a minute on what's going on with revenue in the current year. Locally controlled dollars are up a little bit as well. And the total's up, you can see there, about $20 million. Our adopted budget versus our estimated, we estimated 279 million in salaries, which we think we'll spend about 274 million currently. 174 million we budgeted for benefits. We think it'll come in at less than that. 58 million in the all other, and we're guessing right now at 53 million. So we're spending less in the current year than what we budgeted. That's primarily due to a couple of reasons. Again, we'll go over that on a future slide. But overall, you can see that our ending fund balance would be about 106 million at the end of 21-22. Our financial reserve, PERS reserve, we think it'll end this year with about 9.6 million. Overall total reserve at 115.4 million. This is where our proposed budget comes into one column for 22-23. You can see the numbers there. In terms of where we're at, our numbers go up on the state controlled and on the beginning fund balance, go down on the locally controlled. That's partially because we won't have the Apple lease proceeds to account for next year that we had in the current year. Where we think we're going to be on expenditures, you can see salaries, benefits, and everything else. And our contingency reserve would be around 90 million. That financial reserve for PERS grows a little, and our overall reserves drop to about 106 million. So you can see that we are beginning to spend down those reserves to the tune of $13-14 million in 22-23. In 23-24, that number gets a little more dramatic in terms of where we think we're headed. We bring in 528 million, not including fund balance. We spend 558 million. So we're spending about 30 million under this scenario of those reserves, taking that 90 down to 60. And then if we just jump to the end of the next biennium on our estimate here, 2024-2025, we'd end with about 21 million in our general fund, ending fund balance, and about 28 million in the PERS financial reserve. Overall, close to, but a little less than the board's policy of 5% in the general fund and 5% in the financial reserve. Here's for those of you that don't like to look at the numbers and like to look at it more graphically, here's just a line chart that actually goes back to pre-COVID. You can see the red line here are our expenditures. The blue line is our revenue. You can see for a couple of years, we were spending more than we brought in. You see this gap in the middle here. This is our the start of the pandemic, and this is that second year of the pandemic. This is the current year, 21-22. You see that gap gets closer. And then, as I mentioned on the previous screen, you see that we begin spending more than we're bringing in starting next year based on our budget. And that gap continues to grow in future years. So we keep an eye on those out years at all the time so that we can kind of gauge our impact. And if we have to modify numbers in the earlier years, we can do that. It gives us our ability to do that. What were all those numbers based on? They were based on actuals and projections, right? So we shared some actual stuff. We gave you an estimate of where we think we're going to be this year. We gave you some projections, both a proposed budget as well as a projection for the next couple of years. It assumes the state school fund grows to 9.9 billion. That may be a little aggressive. For those of you that don't know, that's a pretty good increase compared to the increase we got this last go around. Again, assumes that slight decline in enrollment for 22-23, and then we leave it flat thereafter. It also does not reflect a likely PERS increase. We've got advisory rates that suggest our rates could go up a couple of percent in the next biennium. We won't know that till September, but the PERS board will take action this coming September to let us know what those rates will be. So that won't affect us next year, but the following biennium, that will go into effect. So we'll have to keep our eye on that. It reflects our most recent offer of the 3% COLAs and a 3% COLA out in 24-25. It doesn't include any of our SIA funds. It doesn't include high school success, which is the Measure 98 fund. It doesn't have ESSER in the numbers you just looked at. And again, it's based on the best information we had when we put those numbers together. So reserve discussion, let's talk a little bit about that and our budget to actual and kind of what happened this year with our budget. The 2020-2021 ending fund balance was higher than what we had anticipated it being. So spending at the end of the last school year was a little lower than we thought it would be as we went through the end of the school year. In the current year, 21-22 year, there are fewer students in the state of Oregon than there were when this state school fund was put together back in 2021. So when the legislature took action, they approved a $9.3 billion state school fund, and it had a lot more students in there than we have today. So what has happened is our actual dollar amount per student has gone up. So when you think about it, the level of funding available is the same as it's been, but with fewer students, that means there's more per student going into the system currently. Again, from the original estimate, dropped about 24,000 student weights, or 3.4 weights of less, 3.4% student weights have left the system. So that's causing our amount per student to go up, which has actually been surprising for us in that not something I've seen in my 33 years of preparing budgets, but it's a significant decline, which has caused our revenue to actually go above our budget, even though our student count is below what we budgeted. So interesting phenomenon there. Lower spending, 21-22, we're actually spending less than we thought we would budgetarily. Part of that is lower enrollment. Our enrollment dropped, or actually I should say our enrollment did not recover like we anticipated last year, and leaving us with fewer students in the system, which left us with some unfilled positions as we started the year. So each year we'll create a reserve. We'll hold back a certain number of positions to wait and see how the enrollment comes in. If that enrollment doesn't come in, we don't necessarily release those positions. So we had some unfilled positions coming into this year. We also dealt with staffing and sub shortages really heavily in the late fall, early winter. I think those are getting better now and evening out a little better. But that late fall, early winter, we just had one heck of a time getting subs and positions filled. And also we've seen less overall spending in the non-salary area as well. We've got supply chain issues where things just aren't coming in. Folks are ordering things and they're getting really long lead times. And some schools are just saying, I'm going to wait till next year. I don't want to hit my next year's budget. So I'm going to be careful with the funding there. So that's kind of what's gone on with our budget this year and why you see a pretty significant departure from what we budgeted to what's actually occurring. This is a good slide that kind of, again, if you just step back and take a look at what's going on with the district and what's going on in the budget, you see what's going on with enrollment and what our numbers were. You've seen that on a previous slide with the green bars. If you look at the purple line across there, that's our classroom teachers. So we had 1,709 classroom teaching positions in 2018, 2019. And you'll see our budget for this year is 1,727 classroom teachers. So you can see, even though our enrollment has been falling, our number of classroom teachers has gone up over time. Again, more supports to students as we exit the pandemic. And that's been intentional. Same when you look at special education and ELD teachers. See, we had 392.6 in 18-19. Our budget for this coming year anticipates we'll have 425.7. So again, more of those services in special education and ELD as well. And then finally, you look at counselors, student success coaches, and the like, and you'll see that those numbers have gone from 140.4 positions to 244.9 positions. That a lot of that is coming through our SIA with social workers and the like, and part of those behavioral health and wellness teams. So that's a reason for the significant increase there. So I just thought Jessica did a nice job with this slide of kind of saying what's been going on the last several years. Where's our enrollment? Where are our investments in staff? And I think this shows you a pretty good picture of that. Class sizes and what's going on with class sizes. So at the elementary level, you see, and middle and high school, we broke those out at those three levels. You see where they were in 18-19, see where they went up a little bit in 19-20. Remember, that was the year we had some budget reductions that occurred. And then you see since then, they've been on their way back down modestly over the last few years. And again, that data is just translating into class size what you saw on the previous slide in terms of number of classroom positions. Okay, so again, just to summarize, staff impacts, investment in class size in the current year, individual school staffing is still affected by enrollment changes, right? So if you're in a school that's lost a lot of enrollment, you may not be feeling like you've seen that class size investment to the extent an individual school with increasing enrollment might see. You'll see additional staffing and support with one-time ESSER funds. Again, that's student success and academic coaches, et cetera. And overall, from an overall budget perspective, as I mentioned, we'll be deficit spending again. We do that on occasion. We've got significant reserves compared to the last several years. And again, we're always going to be looking forward into the next biennium as we build our budgets and kind of give you a glimpse of what the future might hold. Okay, this is Jessica's part. I'll turn it over to her. Be quiet.
Jessica, you need to unmute.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And now
I got it.
Jessica.
All right, I'm ready. Okay, so we're going to go over the budget document and each of the four main sections: our executive summary or organizational section, our financial section, and informational section. As was mentioned earlier, this is almost a 300-page document, and there's a lot of information there, and I'm going to pick out a few key pages on each section. So next slide, please. The executive summary, this is our first section. This is a very high level liftable section of our document. It provides an overall summary of all of the components in all of the other sections of the document. And I have a few pages here that I'm going to share with you. The superintendent's budget message is on page 4. As Superintendent Groning mentioned earlier, this has a lot of the key factors that drive the development of the budget. On page 10, we have our budget summary by fund, and this shows 5 years of budget history, and you can see some of the major changes in areas such as the grant fund, due mainly to SIA and ESSER over the last several years. And our capital projects fund shows the spend down of our 2014 bond and the potential of a 2022 bond. So it starts a little higher, it goes down, and it's coming back up. On page 11, we have salaries, benefits, and position information. It's very, very high level. It is not broken out by type. It is just for all funds, and it'll show 3 years of actual data and 2 years of budget. And the last thing in this section is our enrollment history and projections. It shows 4 years of actuals, 4 years of projections. This is really important as it is one of the main drivers for our funding and has had significant changes over the last few years. That was kind of started by the pandemic as our enrollment has been declining. On the organizational section, this section is the most narrative section of our budget document. It is a lot of words. It describes the district organization and structure, the mission, vision, and goals of the district, and the budget development process and rules and regulations. In this section, you'll find the strategic measures of student success beginning on page 23. The budget process and financial reporting description on page 40, and a summary of our multi-year investments on page 46. For the financial section, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a section with summary and detailed financial information for all funds. In this, we have a variance analysis on page 60. This describes major budget to budget variances from the 21-22 adopted budget to the 22-23 proposed budget. This is different from some of the information that was previously presented tonight. In the a few slides back because it doesn't include the 21-22 actual projections, and our actuals are very different than what our budget was. On page 72, we have our general fund budgeted positions. This document breaks down general fund positions by function and by the function level. This document used to cover a lot more of our positions than it does now, thanks to our grant fund and SIA and ESSER and high school success. And I know it's not on this slide, but further back in the document on the informational section, we do a breakdown there as well by each fund. The debt information starts on page 137. You'll find information about all of our bond issuances and debt service, including a potential general obligation bond issuance if the 2022 bond passes later this month. And beginning on page 143 is our capital projects fund. This includes a capital improvement plan, which is mostly still geared towards our 2014 bond. Should the 2022 bond be approved by voters later this month, this section will switch from 2014 to 2022 in future budget documents. And just in this, there is a really great visualization of what the 2014 bond has accomplished over the last 8 years with some activity maps. And the last section of the budget document is called the informational section, and there's a lot of data in this section. We present our ratio teacher staffing by school, and this has all of the number of classroom teachers that were allocated by our staffing ratios to individual schools. And it includes the funding source. We have 4 different funding sources that are currently funding classroom teachers: the general fund, local option levy, the student investment account, and ESSER. On page 175, which is immediately following that, presents position allocations for 3 years of actuals and 2 years of budget. It is broken out by group, so you can see licensed, administrators, and classified, and it's also detailed down to the job description as well. On page 191, we have detailed enrollment history and projections. Again, we're showing 4 years of actual data, 4 years of projected data, and this is broken down by individual schools. So if you wanted to look at elementary or schools within that, middle or high school, you can see it in a little bit more detail than you were able to in the executive summary. This is followed by the staffing allocation methodology, or SAM. This begins on page 193, and this presents all of the formulas that are used to allocate resources to our schools. And finally, on page 211, we are going to start with our school summary pages. Each school has a page that presents information about the individual school. It includes things like enrollment, staffing allocations, financial information, demographic information, teacher experience, test scores. There's a lot of information on each one of these individual sheets. Okay, next steps. So for our administration, bargaining is continuing with both BEA and OSEA, and we will continue to modify our ESSER 2 and 3 plans as the pandemic continues to change the needs of our district. For the budget committee, you will receive and review public input, which is coming up shortly on our agenda. And we need to determine what questions the committee needs to have answered over the next week and a half in order to be able to approve the 22-23 budget. Our next budget committee is on May 18th, which is a Wednesday night. And that is it. I'm going to turn it back to you, Chair Edwards.
Thank you, Jessica. This is our opportunity as the budget committee to ask questions that we have regarding presentation tonight, our first review of the budget. So please, if you would hold a hand, I'll try to keep my eyes open for any hands that are up, or even in the chat if you want to say that you've got something, that's fine. Do my fellow committee members have any questions? Oh. Yes, so I see Diane and then Lisa and then Ugana. Go ahead, Diane.
Thanks. Yeah, the actual estimates for this year, this closing, I know they said we get a copy of the slides. There was too much information to like digest in the presentation. So how will we get those and how soon? Because for me, that's a better way to judge the proposed budget is against the actual estimates for last year.
Certainly. And I'm going to sort of piggyback on maybe Jessica. I think that the slides from tonight will be posted to the Budget Committee website. So we'll be able to review those. Is that correct, Jessica?
It'll post to our budget webpage after this meeting, and then we can also email it out to the committee.
Thank you, Diane. Was that it? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Lisa, you have a question or comment?
Oops. There we go. Yes, I have a question. First of all, great job on the budget document. It was really helpful to read through. There's a lot of great information. I had a question on page 174. It goes over which is a great chart, goes over the staffing levels, and then it shows how they're funded, general fund from the option levy or the local option levy and the ESSER funds, et cetera. I know the ESSER funds are going away. I just had a question in general, if someone could make a statement about is it student investment account? Is that what it's called? The SIA funds? How stable is that over time? Do we anticipate? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. The first year, right as the pandemic occurred and we shut down, the reliability of that funding was terrible. But over time, I expect it to be more reliable, right? So like in the current year, we're getting about 30 million. Next year, it's growing to about 32 million. I think it's going to be fairly reliable and predictable as long as our state economy has those corporate activities going that generate the tax. So it's really early in terms of its existence, and we'll watch it over time. But we're hopeful it'll be fairly predictable moving forward.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mike, if I could add something to Lisa's question, though, one of the worries is that as our legislature allocates what our state school fund amount will be, one of the worries is that they're looking at the student investment account, and it was never to supplant the state school fund. It was really to be something that was to supplement. And so there is a worry, Lisa, that maybe when it comes time that maybe certain folks may look at that and say, hey, K-12, you're already getting this and you're getting this. And so there is some worry with that they're looking at these extra dollars to either offset or find out where our current service level is going to start and whatnot. So it's a great question with some unknowns.
Okay. Well, thank you. Again, the chart was very, very helpful in understanding, where how things are allocated and where they're coming from. It's just a great chart. Thank you again for that.
Thanks for your question, Lisa, and welcome back, or welcome for your first year, but back to the Budget Committee. It's good to have you. Ugana and then Sunita, I see your hand up. So Ugana.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is around the SR funds. It talks about 4.1% going towards technology. And this might already have been answered during the course of our discussions about the bond, but I may have missed it. Isn't the bond supposed to take care of technology? Why is 4.1% going towards technology?
Do you want to take that, Jessica, or you want me to talk about it specifically? I think what we've been using it for, Uganda, has been around some software technology pieces where we purchased some software products during the pandemic. I think that's the primary purchase, Jessica, not equipment like you've seen covered in the bond. The bond's mostly about equipment purchases and those kinds of things. And this was some specific pieces of software and some upgrades we made to some software through the pandemic. Am I close, Jessica?
Yes, yes, you are.
And then I have a second question. It just came up when I thought about the question when Don was giving his presentation. And my question is around student support. There was a mention about direct support to students. That was part of the summary. Don's message talked about that. And also, I also see that the SIA has the goal of addressing students' academic achievements. And my question is, because I know that there are schools that are struggling, at least one of my schools, McKinley, is really struggling when it comes to academic achievements. And they are, a lot of our students are really not achieving their goals academically. And I know I mentioned this at the beginning of the very first budget meeting that we had. And I wanted to know, how does this direct support impact the students from economically disadvantaged homes and economically disadvantaged schools like McKinley? I don't know if that question is clear, but
no, and we can also get the committee kind of the full SIA plan document that shows where those resources are being spent. But generally speaking, part of it gets allocated through our staffing allocation methodology, where we are keeping class sizes lower and adding additional resources to those schools that have higher numbers of students experiencing poverty. That's the number one primary example of how those resources get marshaled in that way. The other significant piece of SIA is the behavioral health and wellness teams and social workers and those folks, and the allocations we have made for those as well. So those are probably the biggest ones. Jessica, am I missing any other large section, or is that it? But we could get you just kind of a summary of that plan, just to refresh.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ghana, for your questions. Sunita, and then I see Dr. Perez after Sunita.
Yeah, thank you, Mike and Jessica, for a wonderful presentation. A lot of information, and thanks, Mike, for turning around my question so quickly. I wasn't expecting it, but thank you. My question is, having a lower class size ratio in the schools is important. Does SAM dictates like, okay, this is the maximum that you can have in a classroom? I know we were given an average classroom size for high school, middle school, and elementary school, but is there a max that they put for classroom sizes?
Currently, good question, Director Garg. Currently, we don't have a hard cap number. I know that it just in my experience the last couple of years that we have a small group, SAM, that meets just before school starts, and then for basically the whole month of September as school is starting, looking at class sizes across the district. And we actually have our site-based staff at each school. They're submitting information about class sizes at each grade level, all throughout, especially at elementary, all throughout their system. And we look at those and we hear from their execs, and we have discussions about, because a class size limit that you might have, you might be okay if a number's a little bit larger in a 5th grade class than a kinder class, for example, right? So we don't have a specific hard cap, but it is something that is reviewed and evaluated both prior to the start of school, and then basically pretty much the month of September. We look at those each week.
Is there this this information per school? Because you
Yeah.
look at it every year, right? So is that information available anywhere that we can look at it?
We do have it per school. I don't know that we've got it in an easy to look at view currently, but we look at it for each school at the start of each school year, if that makes sense.
So if you can provide, if you can find it easily, you can provide it to me later on. That would be helpful.
We can pick a date and it'll be specifically at elementary. High schools and middle schools are a little different in that once they start the school year, we might do a little bit of, adding some sections here and there to get them where they need to go. But most of the time, we don't do too much to alter their schedule until the next semester, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
So primarily the data that I could give you that probably would make the most sense would be elementary.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sunita. And Dr. Perez.
Yeah, I just wanted to, on your summary of key takeaway slide, I thought was really good. Had the kind of the student enrollment, and then it had the graph of our staffing, and just seeing, our student enrollment going 41 down to 39,263, and then our staffing way up still is quite concerning as we think about when the budget catches up, when the state funding catches up. And then we also have that levy that we'll need to pass next year to be able to continue to hold class sizes. And then also as ESSER goes away, seeing how many of our counselors and social workers, we've been using our ESSER funds for that to support mental health. So I'm starting to get a pain in my stomach about just thinking about our staffing and how that's going to be impacted. So I guess for our budget committee and for the board, just being mindful of how do we continue to provide lower class sizes as the money will go down over time, over the next couple of years, and then having that levy on the docket as well.
Thanks, Director Perez. That pit in your stomach, I have that pretty much all the time, right? As we look out to future years. Next year will be a key year because it'll be a legislative year. And depending on where we are funded at the legislative level, that will have impacts on the district moving forward, certainly. So that's why we keep an eye on it, and we will pay attention to where we're headed, not just in the year we're in, but looking out 2-3 years at a time to make sure we're giving you a picture.
And you've talked to us about that reserve and the importance of having that reserve so that if something were to happen, we were still able to continue some of that funding if something were to happen in a negative way.
Yeah, that's the whole goal of reserves, right? Is to cushion you against those unexpected times or give you, again, what we like to do in budgeting is we like to keep the little ripples in the water nice and fairly calm. What we don't want are big rapids where we're going up and down and up and down. So that's what we use reserves for. We might be adding to them a little in some years, and we might be lowering them in other years, again, to keep that service level at a pretty constant basis and not put ourselves in the turmoil of adding and turning around the next year and cutting and then, adding back. So the reserves are a critical piece for us in our ability to deliver consistently from year to year.
Yep. Thank you.
Board Chair Collette, I saw your hand up, but then I saw it go down. So I'm going to assume your question was answered. Okay. Jason.
I don't know if it's a question so much as a comment or a thought as we work through this. Just wondering about, with the next budget committee meeting being about 18 to 22 hours after the bond committee vote by voters, if the committee's considering what that's going to look like and what the two messages we might be feeling that evening as we're having that meeting and that discussion and the effects that might have, particularly as we look at closing up the stuff for the first bond and what may be coming for the second or may not, depending on how voters feel, and just wanting to remind folks of that.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate that.
Go ahead, Chair Collette.
Yeah, I got a quick question, Mike. I'm trying to understand over the last biennium, what sort of an increase we saw in state school funding from the Oregon legislature.
Yeah, it was a 3.3% increase, I believe, over the last biennium. I had that in budget listening learning back in January. For those of you that want to go back and reference it, our increase has been between 9 and 13% in the years prior to that. And then again, as Don mentioned, and one of our concerns is between SIA and ESSER, we sure didn't get much of an increase in the state school fund. That is something that I certainly was pretty vocal about with our local legislators, that while we have the SIA that is meant as a supplemental resource, not as funding the core and the base of our operations, and the more or I guess the more disinvestment we have in that core, the more that core has to eat at other things like SIA and ESSER to try to just keep the budget in place that we have. So yeah, it was 3.3% increase, I believe.
3.3, okay. And when you're talking about SIA and ESSER, those are one-time monies.
SIA is consistent and keeps coming. ESSER is purely one time. So again, and if you look, I think we have around 140 positions in ESSER in the current year. It drops down to 105-ish the following year, and then it drops down to about 48 the year after that. So we have this kind of glide path of those staffing going down, which again is a concern, but we're getting those services to kids now with those folks in place. Those positions, they know they're temporary and they will need to be eliminated, at least from ESSER. And without significant increases in funding from the legislature, they may be eliminated completely.
And with the SIA, are you expecting a large percentage increase year over year, or are you expecting those funds to be relatively flat?
Not currently. I'm not expecting large increases.
Okay. And we know that the cost of goods, services, everything else is well outpacing what we receive from the legislature, right?
Correct. The unfortunate thing is, you look at what's going on with inflation currently running in the 7 to 8% range. Well, we're not funded on inflation. And that 3.3 I mentioned, that's over a 2-year period that we're funded. So that's not a 3.3% increase per year. That was over the 2 years of the biennium. So the disconnect here is between our funding and what's going on with inflation. It just erodes our ability and our purchasing power as a district.
So if I'm putting all the pieces together and I have that same knot in my stomach as Karen, when I'm looking at that, and the same concern, it seems like one of the key pieces here is talking to the legislature to make sure that they provide us the level of funding year over year, that gap that you're showing on the out years, where we start to go negative year after year, doesn't occur.
Exactly.
Thanks, Mike.
Heidi, can I go back and just comment on Jason's comments, because I think it's a very important comment. We're all hoping the bond passes, and because if it would not pass, there is a lot of deferred maintenance in the next year or 2 years that will have to be completed in the district, because it's essential to the safety and functioning of the school district. And I think that it could have a direct impact on the next year, and definitely the next couple of years, the bond does not pass. So to your point, Jason, it will, there will have to be, some adjustments made, whether, the board decides they're going to go out again for the bond. And then once again, to remind the committee that the local option levy is also will end in June of 2023. So there's, once again, lots of assumptions being made, but it could have some long-lasting impact, not only for the next couple of years, but for years to come.
Thank you, Superintendent Grading. And I would also reiterate the importance of all of us being involved in the efforts to get the bond passed. It doesn't pass on its own, as we know, and many of us have been out in campaign mode and helping for different interests and candidates, but also this bond is really critical to the future and success of the school district. So really encourage involvement in that. And we have another weekend and some to go before that vote. So Becky, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you, Chair Edwards. Mike, I want to just ask, when you went back to that 3.3% increase that we received, do we know if that 3.3% increase covered the current service level that we offer? And then when we talk about that current service level, as you keep pointing out, we have added staff because of the ESSER funds. Will that be taken? How will we take that into account as far as our level, knowing that these are one-time funds? How will we compare an apple-to-apple comparison there?
Well, it's going to be difficult. It's a good question, Director Timchuk. It's going to be difficult. And some of the larger school districts in the state have already begun that conversation, right? Like we're all kind of in different spots because we've got these braided funds now where we've got our general fund that funds the operations of the district. We've got SIA now, which is a new dedicated resources that's supposed to put a spotlight on our disadvantaged communities and underrepresented communities. And then we've got ESSER funding sitting out there on the side of that as well. So it's going to be a complicated message to the legislature starting next fall to help them understand and to know that different districts may be using these funds differently based on what their communities gave them for feedback and the priorities within their school district. So I think you bring up a good point that it is going to be difficult to see and look at. The 9.3 billion did not get us to a level. We needed 9.6. If you remember last year in the budget, we talked about 9.6 being the number that we needed to get where we needed to go.
And then my follow-up question here is, can you recall a time when you've been putting together budgets? Because I certainly can't remember a time in the 7 years I've been on the school board where you have so many unknowns when you're trying to put together a document, such as not knowing exactly as we are bargaining with our different bargaining units. So we don't know for sure. We're 2 or 3 years out. That we are looking at whether or not a bond passes or not, and what that means to what we will have to cover in a general budget, and that we just have these variables that we are unknowns. Can you think of a time that we are trying to put together a document for a year long that we have so many variables that we really don't know the exact answers as you're asking us as a budget member to pass a budget?
No, I mean, and it hasn't been for 2 years. As Diane mentioned, looking at budget to actuals, you'll see that our budget to actuals are not great the last 2 years. And they're not great because we're trying to run a school district through a pandemic, right? And so depending on what the rules are and what the guidance is from the state, from the Oregon Health Authority, can we bring kids into schools? If we do, what are the limits? What are the requirements placed on the district? And then adding on top of that, the one-time sources of funds versus the ongoing and still in bargaining. No, I can tell you, I have not experienced the level of uncertainty we've had the last couple of years and the level of uncertainty I anticipate even going into next year. And I'm old.
I was going to say, you have been doing this many decades, correct?
Correct.
So we're not just going back 7 years, it's been a long time. Yeah. I do see Susan and then Sunita for questions. Susan?
First of all, Becky asked my question, but I just wanted to echo what Becky was saying, the fact that there's so much uncertainty, whether the bond's going to pass, and that bargaining is still going on, really adds a lot of uncertainty. And then, of course, you add to it, we don't know what the state's going to fund. So I'm just going to echo what Becky said and say I'm also very concerned about it.
Sunita, question?
Yeah, a follow-up question on Becky's, the uncertainties. We see a lot of uncertainties, and I saw about, I think it was a 6% contingency reserve, like 95 million. Was that, I don't know if that was the right number. Mike, you can confirm that, but do you feel that that gives you a comfort level, at least for a year, to take care of if bond doesn't pass, it would take care of deferred maintenance and we can keep the same level of services for our students? What do you feel with that contingency level?
I don't think we've got, we haven't budgeted for deferred maintenance. I mean, and the Sunita, just the actual way it works in Oregon, the way we're funded and the way we're actually encouraged to fund deferred maintenance out of bonds instead of the general fund, doesn't set us up for success if we don't pass the bond. We need that bond to pass in order to fund those projects. We won't be able to fund those projects without it. I've been in districts where I've seen trouble getting bonds passed, and it pits class size and investment in teachers against capital items to keep schools safe, and it's not where you want to be as a district. So I would say no, we don't have the funding to take care of the deferred maintenance we have. I would leave the question of could we limp along for a year with Deputy Superintendent Mead. He'd be better able to answer that, but generally speaking, no, we wouldn't have the resources.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from committee members? If not, we are going to move into public testimony. And first, we're going to review the 4 comments. I think, Jessica, maybe you have that. And then we'll go to our 2 individuals for live testimony. And I'll wait until the live testimony. I have something else to add to that. But go, Jessica, you have our questions. Is that correct?
Sure. Mike, can you put the slides back up, please?
Can do.
Okay, we received 4 comments, and so we've put these on here and we have provided some answers to them. The first comment is, can you please point out specifics on how the budget reflects the pillars of excellence? The district budgets for excellence in many areas. We've made significant investments in class sizes overall and targeted class size reductions at high poverty schools. This, combined with a rigorous hiring process, ensures excellence in instruction for all Beaverton students. In addition, the district's strategic plan, including the goals and pillars, will be reviewed in the upcoming year as we come out of the pandemic and onboard a new superintendent. Question number 2, if an alien from another world looked at our budget, what would they see that it prioritizes? Top 3. Do these differ from the stated prioritizations of BSD leadership? The priorities of the district include an investment in classroom teachers, behavioral health and wellness of students, and allocating resources to students based on poverty-weighted enrollment calculations. And these investments are evidenced throughout the proposed budget document. Comment number 3, how are we improving equity in Title I compared to affluent schools? The superintendent's budget message references the staffing allocation methodology, and the full SAM is included in the informational section of the budget document. This describes how resources are allocated to schools based on the number of students living in poverty. SAM was reevaluated in the fall of 2019 for implementation in the 2020-21 school year with the addition of the student investment account, creating a more equitable and responsive allocation of resources to schools. And the last comment is, how does the budget support the mental health of children? So on pages 175 and 176, we've talked about it, those pages a little bit tonight. In your budget document, there is an increase in the staffing since 2018-19 in the areas of counselors, student success coaches, school support specialists, social workers, school nurses, and other behavioral health and wellness supports. Also included in your budget document towards the back on page 274 is a description of our student success teams, which are also known as behavioral health and wellness teams.
And that's all we had.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. We have two individuals for live testimony. One of them had to leave a little bit early. We just have a little brief note before we go into our live public comment. So we've set aside time for live public comment and happy to be able to provide that. Please plan to limit comments to 2 minutes. The budget committee will not hear charges or complaints against any district employee, and district employees and board members cannot be named specifically during testimony. If a commenter names a staff or board member once, they will be asked to refrain from doing so again. If they name a staff or board members again, their testimony will be ended. Budget committee members will listen to the commenter only, and budget committee members will not comment or ask questions. And with due respect, I want to introduce Jeff Myers. Is Jeff on the line with us here? Hi, Jeff. Thanks for
Hello.
being here tonight. And you have 2 minutes for your testimony.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. And I'll see how many of these questions I can get through or share with y'all in 2 minutes. So I just urge you all, as you're going through this process, to put your detective hats on, right, and ask those tough questions. I got some of the ones you asked, and that was great. I'll give you a few others that if I were in your shoes that I would love to have answered. Like one thing has been brought up about the investment in class size and how that's been a priority. And one question I'd have is, well, if the student enrollment did not drop this year, that was unexpected, right? If it hit the plan that the district had set aside or had put in their budget last year, is it true that the student-teacher ratio would have actually increased this year? So I would consider that not an investment if it would have increased per the original plan, which I believe it would. And also in this year, in the proposed budget, and this is a question I have, and just the data that I have available to me is I can see how the district calls out the student-teacher ratio compared to the state. And I've noticed that for some reason, the state data has changed that they compare to, that all of a sudden now makes Beaverton look like it has a lower student-to-teacher ratio than in past years. It's been higher. And it seems like the data changed. I didn't see any explanation in the proposed budgets. I'd like to know, why did that data change? And what is the explanation for that now makes it look like Beaverton has lower class sizes than the higher ones that we know it has? Also, there was an update today about the ESSER funds. I appreciate the updates there. Still looks like there's another 12 million in funds that are unspent. And again, you're going to the community and asking the community to fund a bond that would cover technology and a lot of things. ESSER is a one-time use fund. It seems like there's an opportunity here to reduce the bond ask and use the ESSER funds for technology. Why was that not done? Last thing about ESSER funds, I know it hired about 20 classroom teachers, which is great. There were another 120 plus teachers that it funded. And I know that you didn't want to hire more teachers as you talk about that wave of you might have to let people go because these are one-time funds. Have you notified the other 120 people who were funded using the ESSER funds that their positions are potentially temporary? Or are you planning to fund them other ways? The last thing would be House Bill 4030, $78 million of funds available for attracting and retaining talent. Grants are available to be filed now. What are the district's plans to file and try to get a portion of those $78 million that can be used towards attracting and retaining talent? I didn't see that mentioned today, and that'd be great to know.
Mr. Myers, thank you. You got in that 2 minutes. Appreciate your questions. And just for follow-up, will we be adding those questions for response to our next budget meeting? I'm just looking for an affirmative or.
We can do that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. Since we're not to comment on the questions now. Thank you, Mr. Myers, for your questions and for participating tonight. Also, so unfortunately, Jennifer Bavacqua had joined us but had to leave, but has left her comment with David Williams. Would you like to read the comment or questions that Jennifer had?
Happy to. Thank you, Chair Edwards, members of the Budget Committee, David Williams, Executive Administrator for Strategic Initiatives. Just reading this comment. She apologized for leaving early. I'm a parent of 2 sons in BSD. I support social emotional learning, diversity, and striving towards equity in BSD. Specifically, I am hoping there is more fiscal attention on BIPOC kids, special education kids, and kids in Title I schools. I'm hoping to hear answers to the following questions, which may be answered by the webpage you referred to on accountability with diversity. Can you please provide the web address for that? I cannot find it. Can you also please tell me where to find the answers to written submitted comments from parents? Questions. What are the measurable goals around equity that involve the budget? How has the budget evolved over the last 2 years to support stated diversity and equity goals? And what required, not optional, anti-bias staff trainings does the budget pay for? And I will go ahead and send this in writing to Mike and Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And that concludes the live testimony that we had for this evening. We're going to move into our next agenda item, which is closing remarks with Superintendent Grotting.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, members of the committee. And just once again, I want to thank you for your time, for your effort to help review our budget, ask questions. And I know that myself, my entire team, budget committee, board members, and even our business department, we're here to answer your questions. So send them in and we'll try to get answers back to you as soon as possible. Now, I just want to comment, boy, you're reading this budget, and for somebody to come in, school budgets, government budgets are very complex. There's general budget, there are title budgets, there's grant budgets, we have bond in here. I believe when you look at it, I believe our total budget, you're looking at like over 1,500,000,000. It's an entire budget. So for you to take the time and go through this and ask these critical questions, I just applaud you. And once again, big shout out. Mentioned Mike and Jessica, but we have an entire business department, communications department that helps with this document. And this just isn't something that goes together in a couple of weeks. Been working on this for months. So thank you all. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Chair Edwards.
Thank you.
And Chair Edwards, if we could we have Jessica summarize kind of what she's thinking she needs for the next meeting? If that's
yes.
possible.
Oh, you know, and forgive me, Jessica, I think I just completely skipped over you in the summary for our next meeting, our May 18th meeting. So please do.
That is okay. So for our next meeting, I have a couple of things that I have notes on that we'll bring back. We are going to get our detailed SIA plan and our SAM allocations related to those, our SAM formulas related to those allocations. We're also going to get one of the class size documents that we use in the fall as we're looking at elementary class sizes. And I have notes on the public testimony that was given tonight. In order for us to be prepared for the May 18th meeting, the question form for the budget committee is still open. And if you could try your best to get those in by the end of day on Monday so that we can be prepared and have our answers ready for you at the meeting. We will also be approving the minutes from this meeting on May 18th and answering any additional questions that you have. And finally, voting on the approval of the 22-23 proposed budget and the tax levies.
And I would just add to that and kind of as a reinforcement, if you could get your questions, as Jessica mentioned to us, soon, then that puts us in a position we'll have on the agenda to approve the budget at that meeting on the 18th. And so what we don't like to do is have questions that we can't answer at the meeting that leaves, some level of uncertainty as we prepare to approve the budget. So if you got questions and you get them to us, we'll get you answers so that you're prepared and comfortable with voting on the budget again on the 18th. So just helps us all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jessica and Mike. So just to reiterate the importance of our questions, sooner the better, so we can get those questions answered, and we'll convene again on May 18th. But in the meantime, we have a very important bond measure to pass. So hopefully you've got your rain boots on at some point this week and are able to go out to our neighbors and make some phone calls and get people to vote by May 17th, the day before our next meeting. That being said, I would like to call for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I motion to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Jason. Is there a second? I see Susan, you're just, yep.
I second.
Second, okay.
Yeah.
That being said, we're not going to vote on that adjournment. I'm going to just say yay. I'll say yay, correct? Thank you, everybody, for all of your work and time and dedication to the school board budget and to the work of BSD. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.